It is widely regarded as one of the greatest human achievements ever made, but putting a man on the moon was no cheap undertaking. The Apollo missions to send just 12 men onto the dusty lunar surface cost $25 billion. $17 billion, estimated to be worth around $170 billion in modern monetary value. But it appears we may be able to send humans back to our rocky satellite and set up a permanent base where they could live for just a fraction of the cost. A group of NASA scientists has calculated it may be possible to return to the surface of the moon within the next 5 to 7 years for a total cost of just $10 billion. Indeed, they say it may be possible to build a base that can support up to 10 astronauts for more than a year by 2022, as many of the technologies needed already exist today. While the U.S. currently has no firm plans to return to Mars, the European Space Agency, Russia and China have all expressed interest in building a base there. This has led to fears that NASA risks being left behind in a new era of space exploration by focusing its efforts on a mission to an asteroid before going on to Mars. But many believe establishing a base on the moon is an essential step towards future manned missions to the red planet. Writing in a special edition of the journal New Space, Chris McKay, an astrobiologist at NASA's Ames Research Center in California, along with John Cumbers, a synthetic biologist at NASA, and Alexandra Hall, who also works at NASA Ames, said, "For a variety of very good reasons, it is time to go back to this moon, this time to stay, and funding is no longer the main hurdle." In a series of papers, a number of spaceflight experts argue the costs of building a lunar base are much lower than expected and that there is substantial commercial value there. They said a lunar base could double as a commercial mining base to allow the moon's resources to be exploited. Furthermore, competition between private space companies could help to reduce the costs further and open up new business opportunities with the presence of a manned base on the moon. Dr. McKay and his colleagues said, when the cost of a short stay on the moon drops into the tens of millions of dollars per person, it starts to tap into the same market that has given us private spaceflight participants to the International Space Station. The presence of a government base is also the presence of a customer on the moon, a factor that can stimulate the development of services, supplies, and technology to the benefit of all. The researchers hope their papers can persuade NASA to invest some of its annual $19 billion budget on sending humans back to the moon. It comes less than a year after a study by the National Space Society and the Space Frontier Foundation estimated it would cost $10 billion for two competing companies to send astronauts back to the moon in cooperation with NASA. It concluded a permanent lunar base could be established for around $38 billion, but a paper by Lynn Harper, lead of Astrobiology Advanced Missions and Technologies at NASA Ames Research Center's Space Portal, along with colleagues from the University of Notre Dame in Indiana, said the technology to support human life on the moon already exists. Self-driving cars and green toilet technology being developed on Earth could be adapted, while many technologies on the International Space Station could also be used on the moon. They say sites for the lunar base could be selected by sending survey robots to the moon's surface to characterize the terrain, resources and any hazards that may exist. Astronauts could then initially be landed for a few days and then weeks to begin construction of a lunar base before it can then be occupied by 10 people. This could then be expanded to encompass a settlement of 100 people within a decade. They say water and air recycling systems that provide much of the life support on the International Space Station could be employed to make the space habitable. They suggest food and water could initially flown from Earth, but this would be expensive. Instead, they say vertical farming methods, which farm tilapia fish in aquaponic systems, could be used. The waste produced by them would then be used to provide nutrients for plants. They warn, however, that water ice in craters close to the lunar poles may prove to be challenging, as it may need processing before it can be used. But they conclude that perhaps the most important resource available on the moon will be near continuous sunlight. They said, while more efficient technologies would certainly benefit the settlement, we have access to sufficient life support technologies to support implementation of the first human settlement on the moon today. This special edition of New Space was published following a workshop held in 2014 that aimed to develop low-cost solutions to allow humans to settle on the moon. A third paper claims many of the costs of building a lunar base could be offset by establishing industrial activities on the moon. Alexandra Hall and Charles Miller from Next Gen Space LLC in Arlington, Virginia, argue a base of 4 private sector astronauts could produce 200 metric tons of propellant per year for NASA. They said, a permanent commercial lunar base might substantially pay for its operations by exporting propellant to lunar orbit for sale to NASA and others to send humans to Mars, thus enabling the economic development of the Moon at a small marginal cost. To build structures on the Moon, the Dennis Wingo, from spacecraft manufacturer SkyCorp, said materials from meteors and the lunar soil could be used as construction materials. New 3D printing technologies could also be used to robotically create structures using the lunar soil, while broken components could also be replaced by printing, saving the need to launch spares to the Moon. Alternatively, inflatable habitats, like those being developed by Bigelow Aerospace, could also be used on the Moon to provide shelter to astronauts. Mr. Wingo said the best possible site for the first lunar base could be a Perry crater close to the Moon's North Pole. The area is extremely flat, while it also receives considerable amounts of sunlight and may have abundant levels of minerals. He said, the Moon, perhaps at Perry Crater, is the first significant development step, and this industrial development will enable human civilization to expand to Mars, and beyond.